Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. On this episode, I sat down with Harlan Pease. He's an exceptional man and a friend of mine, and he does all sorts of very cool things. He's a musician's on call. What that means is, as a musician, he goes in and plays for people, patients in the hospital and in hospice. He was also a songwriter, which is how we met initially. And he's a teacher of literature and composition. Not only does he teach locally at the community college, Nashville State Community College, but he also teaches in the prison system here in Tennessee. Here in the state of Tennessee, they have a program that was implemented not too long ago. It's only a few years old, if that. And basically what it does is it provides college courses to inmates so that they can get their college degrees and get some education, which is fantastic. And so Harlan is a part of that. He was one of the first, in fact, that was able to teach in the newly implemented programs. So it's very cool. We talk about all that stuff. So I looked up some statistics about prison education reducing recidivism or reoffending. What are the rates of people who get an education in prison and the chances of committing crimes again and ending up back in prison, in other words. So I'm reading off of from prisoneducation.com. Why do 70 to 85% of prisoners return to prison? Lack of education, lack of skills. Those are the two top reasons. So this is the recidivism rate with education levels. People with some high school courses, 55% recidivism, meaning they return to prison. Vocational training, 30% recidivism. An associate's degree, it drops down to 13.7% of the chances of them returning to prison. A bachelor's degree, that drops again to 5.6% chance of them returning to prison. And if they get a master's degree, that drops to 0. That is astounding. If that isn't a good reason to educate people that are in the prison system, I mean, sheesh, I don't know what is. This is the 55th episode. I can't believe it. 55 episodes. And coming up, July last year is when I started doing Hey Human, and it has been incredible. I've enjoyed every second of it, and I'm excited for what's coming. And in honor of the year anniversary of Hey Human, my friend Ellen Severe actually came over earlier today, and she interviewed me. So this week will be Harlan's episode, and then episode 56 will be the episode that I am being interviewed, which is fun. It's been great, and I'm so appreciative to all of you who have listened and who have written reviews and have reached out to me. I get the loveliest texts and emails, and it makes me happy to know that it makes you all happy, and that everybody's stories are getting out there, and it's just super cool. As I just found out this week that basically if you have an Android or an iOS phone, so Apple product or an Android product, you can get Hey Human on an app for either phone. So that means I did a quick Google search on a bunch of different podcast apps, and Hey Human came up in all of them. So that's really exciting. So now I don't have to ramble off all the different various podcast apps. Y'all can probably just pull up whatever you've got or download a particular app off of the App Store on your phone and get that going on. Anyway, as usual, if you haven't already, please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes. Reviewing is great. I think that people, when they see what other people think, they're more apt to check it out if they've never heard of it before. Like anything else, when you review a product or whatever, if somebody likes it, then you're more likely to buy it yourself. So in the world of listening to podcasts, if other people like the podcast and say so, I think it ups the chance that new ears will dive in. As also, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter under Hey Human Podcast. You can email me, Susan at heyhumanpodcast.com. And I think that's all the stuff. So without further ado, here is Harlan Pease. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hello, Harlan Pease.
Good morning, Susan. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for being on Hey Human.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You are a very interesting man. I'm going to read your things here. So
okay.
You teach at Nashville State Community College. Mm-hmm. You teach at Charles Bass. That's a correctional facility?
That's a correctional facility. It's no longer open,
around.
But I did used to teach there, yeah.
Turney Correctional Center.
Yep.
As well. You're also a musician on call.
That's correct.
4 musicians on call.
Uh-huh.
And you're a songwriter, performing
That's
songwriter. So let's start at the thing that interests me most, because it's all about me. What interests me
as
the
it
most
should be
is the teaching in the correctional facility. Talk about that. And what's your background as far as education?
You mean teaching,
your degree? Or?
I have a master's in literature from Northeastern University, and I have a graduate concentration in communications from Austin Peay.
Okay. Austin?
Austin Peay up in Clarksville.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Not in Austin.
Not in Austin, no.
It's tricky. It's very tricky.
Sorry, I keep looking at the meter over here. I want to make sure we're not peeking it. My bad. I'll come back to it.
That's a very musician thing of you.
So I taught my first course at Charles Bass, which was a minimum security prison. And it has since been closed, and they've moved that population to an annex of Turney Correctional Center out in Only, Tennessee.
Why did they close it down?
I'm sure it was just financially based.
Yeah.
Some of the privatization of prisons has changed the number of, what do they call it? It doesn't matter what the abbreviation is, but I think just financially they couldn't justify having that population of minimum security only. Mm-hmm. And then they changed the designation. Turney was a medium to max security facility, and they changed the designation to time building, which means they put people... Time building, yes. Uh-huh. So for people who are just basically working off their sentence, and they're not a behavioral problem for the most part, they're going to end up in that population. So I guess that was kind of the justification. They sort of saw like the delineation between minimum and medium didn't need to be quite so, like we didn't have these people 60 miles apart, I guess.
Oh. So, are they in the population together, the minimum and the mediums?
Minimum live in what they call an annex, but they come together for meals, work. Oh. So, and that way...
That must be terrifying. If I've done something minimum and that justifies minimum security and I have to break bread with the max people, I wonder if that's freaky.
I mean, I think... I'm sure. I can only imagine what those people go through. But the people who are... If you were like hardcore max, you're in Riverbend.
Oh, a different place altogether.
And Riverbend is still... It's near Charles Bass, and that's still in operation, and that's...
The hardcore.
That's the hardcore place.
Okay. It sounds lovely, Riverbend.
Riverbend, yes.
I love irony. Yeah. Irony.
A gated community.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Anyway.
Horrifying. So, okay, in Tennessee, it didn't used to be, I'm going to rhyme this, in Tennessee, it didn't used to be that people like you and me could go in. I'm just going to keep going with the rhyme. No, I'm kidding.
You got to run it too.
So... there used to not be the educational system within the prisons. That's something that happened
recently.
So talk about that, okay. The pre and post.
Just to give a little background, what is unique about the program I've been involved in is it's offering college credit. Inmates have been able to earn their GED at Turney for a long time. They actually have a school there. So they've had that option. But Julie Duchin she went to Lipscomb for her, I believe, her educational doctorate. And part of what her interest was educating the incarcerated population. So she had to do a tremendous amount of work that really goes unappreciated as to how much she had to overcome. Nashville State, which is where I work, was the only college she could find willing to offer accredited courses. So she approached some other places, and they weren't willing to put their name on, yes, this is legitimate college credit.
Oh, wow. Even though the teachers were the same.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Were they afraid of giving prisoners education?
I can't speak to that. I can say that when Julie did this and announced it, there was a considerable backlash from the community about giving prisoners education.
Isn't that so... I'm probably going to cut you off like 1,000 times. I find that so fascinating because it's been proven time and again that education gets people out of situations where they would be more likely to commit crime. So it would seem like a no-brainer to go in and educate the prisoners so that their likelihood of reoffending would drop.
Absolutely.
I mean, teach them to read and write, which some of these folks don't even know how to read.
Mm-hmm.
How, first of all, what a lonely world that would be. I can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm shocked that people would have a backlash on something like educating another human being.
It's, I will say that I think even some of the guards have been a bit, I'll just use the word standoffish, that's probably a little mild, about the idea of the prisoners getting a free education.
Oh, interesting too. I'm going to say interesting a lot as well.
Yeah. That's okay.
I find this stuff fascinating. Oh, wow. So here's, Joe Smith, the guard, who didn't go to college perhaps and is pissed because these inmates are getting a free ride to learn. Oh, interesting. Still, you know what? Let the guards do it too. Yeah. Why not?
Well, and that was absolutely I said, you know what? If there's going to be a guard in the room, I don't care. I'll teach one more person.
Sure. Did they have a problem with that? My God, they're working for like $12 an hour, and they should be able to take free classes.
Well, and as state employees, I'm assuming their deal is the same. They can take a class for free every semester, like up to 3 classes a year for free.
I didn't know that.
That's how I did my graduate stuff at Austin P.
Really?
Because as a state employee, well, I don't know. That might be specific program. To TBR, but
or
it
Tennessee.
Absolutely was.
Is that what TBR is?
Yeah. Well, Tennessee is TBR is Tennessee Board of Regents.
Okay.
And we fall under that umbrella.
Okay.
But I believe it. I actually have a student in class this summer. He's an architect and he's in his 60s, and he said,
"This is at the regular college."
Yeah, this is at sorry.
It's okay. I was like, right on, man. Yeah. Prisoners give me an architect when he gets out. I love that.
He said, we were talking one day after class, and he said if you are over 60 in the state of Tennessee, you can audit a class for free.
Wow.
Which is really cool.
At a state school.
At a state school.
Yeah.
You can go in and audit them. You don't earn credit. But so he's in there, and he's a pretty laid-back guy. I'm getting off topic.
No, it's okay. This is great.
He's competed in a number of triathlons. Uh-huh. And if you looked at him, you would not think this is a triathlon person. But he said he looking at a family photograph and saw like how much weight he had put on, and coming from a family of people who were athletic, he was like, "This is my wake-up call." And so he said after you jump off the I guess it was the San Francisco Bay Bridge into the water to swim, he said, "You're really not scared of a whole lot anymore."
Wow.
Pretty cool. But anyway, to get back to the prison thing, so Julie had done this groundwork, and she started at Charles Bass. They were willing to have us in. The president of our school supported the program, and
who is the president of your school? What's the shout
George
out?
Van Allen, George Van Allen, Dr. Van Allen.
Good for George Van Allen.
And he supported that, and my dean asked me if I would teach the course, and I said I would. And I went, and it was I've been reticent to use this much of a word, or expression, but it was life-changing. Because my knowledge of people in a prison population was pretty limited, and my knowledge of their life, we've all seen Shawshank Redemption, and there's a degree of accuracy in that, but it's not the whole, and it's also set at a time, different time. And I just met some wonderful people. We know few in common.
Yes,
You've had someone.
I've had them both on the podcast.
Yeah.
Adam Shelby and David Nunn.
David Nunn, yeah, and they were in that first group of.
They were
people.
together in the first.
Yeah, I only taught one course at Charles Bass.
Oh, okay.
Before it closed, and then I went out to Turney.
Okay, so here you are. You're teaching in regular college, and now you have this opportunity to go in and teach prisoners. Mm-hmm. And this is minimum and medium prisoners?
The first class was just minimum.
Just minimum,
Just
okay.
minimum, yeah.
What is a minimum? What does that mean? Like, not rape or anything, or is that sometimes? Or what is that? Does minimum have to do with the time limit?
I think it has to do with where they are in their sentence.
Okay. Not the level of crime they've committed.
I know that in that class there was someone who's convicted of vehicular manslaughter, 2 people. He had a 14-year sentence.
Okay. And
there was another person I know that killed someone, and I think I'm not sure the designations, but it wasn't a premeditated murder.
So manslaughter.
Is it that manslaughter?
Manslaughter means it's not premeditated.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, and then of course David was in there, and David has a colorful past, and we know he was.
He does.
He was definitely in the medium
It's
security.
a great episode, by the way, for those of you listening.
Shout out.
I highly recommend going back and listening to David Nunn's episode. It's good. Okay, so here you are getting ready for the first day, and talk about that. I mean, curly-haired white guy going in classes.
Yep, exactly. My hair was shorter then; it wasn't full-on curly then, but.
I'm just describing you so that they can see a picture if they want to, but for the listeners, so you're like a regular guy,
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say my heart wasn't beating faster, but I've taught for a while now, and I used to teach high school. And one thing you learn as a teacher is you have to go and you have to put your game face on the first day.
High school's terrifying, right? Those kids will eat you alive.
That might have been worse. No. Well, in some ways it
was.
was.
No guards in the high school.
But you learn, you have to go in, you have to put your game face on, and you have to set boundaries from the beginning.
Sure.
So I walked in, and the most uncomfortable part was, normally in a classroom, I will walk in 1 minute before or right at 8 o'clock at the start time. I'm not somebody who comes in and socializes with my students for 10 minutes. So the uncomfortable part was walking in and there being this time to kill because you can't really orchestrate that. You have to go through the security and get scanned and all that and get escorted back to the classroom. So there I'm sitting there, and there's obviously this really awkward, I'm clearly the person teaching the class, and here are the inmates, and everyone's kind of just looking at each other and not saying a word.
Because this program had never been done. This is literally the very first.
Very first class.
Okay.
Really, it was the very first class of its kind in the state of Tennessee. So, I'm just putting a shout out. That's more on Julie and how much work she did to get this together. But once I started, I handed out the syllabus. We started talking. Probably the first hour was a little tense and cracked a couple jokes. They opened up a little bit. I talked about what was going to happen this semester. They were extremely respectful, extremely interested. In terms of having an interested class, the prison population, they're there and they are there to learn. Although David talked about how when we talked to him, he said, at first it was just a way to get across campus and get out of doing something else. But nonetheless, it developed into something where, I've had classes at Turney where I'll go out and I don't even get myself unpacked before they're asking a question about the reading.
Yeah.
And then next thing I know, it's hey, we got to go, guys. It gives in a big, I guess the takeaway for me is a reminder of just how juicy and valuable learning is. I guess that wasn't a good metaphor.
I think it's great. David had mentioned that it gave him something to how he finally felt self-respect. He had a goal. He had something to live for. He started thinking, oh, maybe I'm not a piece of shit. Mm-hmm. Maybe, and just that little tiny change in one's self-assessment
absolutely
can do wonders.
That is so much more valuable than the college credit. Although, there's something to be said for that. But I mean, I'm coming at it from a liberal arts background, and I believe in the value of education for education's sake. And
hippie.
Damn hippie. So last fall, I'm kind of skipping around.
That's not even an insult
bit.
anymore. Like, you can't call me hippie like nobody cares. You have to call them liberal nowadays. Anyway.
But
that's something, an offshoot of that, which I've been called that a few times. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't take it as a bad way, in a bad way.
Doesn't insult me at all. I'm like, yeah, absolutely.
So last fall at Belmont, excuse me, I said that. Last fall, Belmont hosted a national conference for education, higher education in prisons. Mm-hmm. So I presented there and talked about my experiences. And I had more of a presentation that I talked about our responsibility as educators to give the students the exact same experience we would give all of our students, that we can't cut slack or cut them slack or grade them differently, because from what I've seen, I think the downside of, I guess, that liberal arts mentality or outlook, that mentality is the wrong word, is you get people in there who are maybe a little too bleeding heart about the whole thing, and everything's like, oh, they're victims and they're...
Oh, no, you can't do that. Yeah.
I don't think, from my experience, the inmates themselves don't want to. There are some who want to have a victim mentality, but the ones who are improving themselves realize that they have to work on themselves.
Sure.
To give you an example, at that Belmont.
Well, and they have to try to get into that class. They don't just they don't just get to get in. David and Adam both said that you have to take a placement test.
You have to take a placement test, have a job, pay a certain... Oh, absolutely. It's not a gimme.
And after your first class in that first semester, or was it semesters or quarters? After the first semester, other inmates that were like, "Wait, what's going on?" Seeing it reflected back at them from the students. Mm-hmm. They wanted, and some of them couldn't even read. And Adam and David talked about how they tutored other prisoners to help them get into the. I mean, how beautiful is that?
It's like an addict in recovery that can reach out to another addict, and they say that's the most powerful thing for people in recovery.
It's is the mirror.
To share that. So, I'm going to go back to that conference just for a second and share a couple of things that happened. Sure. The first thing that happened was the warden, I'm not sure of his title, but I believe he is the head warden for the prison system in Tennessee. He got up and spoke, and he used the word convict. And there were people who were taking umbrage to this use of the word convict. But the inmates refer to themselves, they call each other convict. They're comfortable with that. It's this other... it's like the pendulum has swung too far. We can't call them convicts. Let's call them students. Well, they are students, but first and foremost,
they're convicts.
That's the bulk of their day.
They've been convicted. It's a proper reference. I mean,
so that's a mentality that's the opposite end of the pendulum from the people who think no, they should just be doing hard labor every day and be given bread and water. So when I did my presentation, one thing I talked about was our responsibility. And maintaining discipline in the classroom is very important, because they need to understand that that's how it works. I mean, that's the system. And a couple of people were offended by that. And one person said, well, don't you think you're coming from a space of privilege? And I'm like, of course I'm coming from a space of privilege. I'm not incarcerated. I grew up with two parents who loved and cared for me. And of course I'm coming.
Tell you how to read and write.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you can't break down all the structures of society to accommodate someone, because that's what got some of these people in there in the first place, is growing up in an unstructured world where they didn't think the rules mattered. Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting thing. I'm passionate about it. I'm going back out to teach at Turney this fall. I'm going to teach a communications class. We're not going to change the world, but we can change microcosms, and one piece at a time, for the people who get it, the David Nunns, the Adam Shelby, who come out of that, and they see that. It's interesting you use the expression "a piece of shit," because that's what made me think about the addicts and the reaching out. Is so many of them feel like they don't have a purpose
or worth,
or exactly,
yeah.
And part of what gives them that helps them overcome this is seeing, like, if I can help one other person. And it makes all the difference. And,
yeah.
I mean, Adam Shelby's a bright guy.
He's very bright.
He's a very bright guy. And opening that door for him, I mean, I think about all the things I've done with education, and a lot of it is run-of-the-mill, every day. Students don't make much of an impression on you, and you don't make much of an impression on them.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the ones that stand out, and like some of the high schoolers I taught who still keep in touch. It's 10 years ago now. More that they graduated. Anyway. So that a shout out to Julie Duchin and Dr. Van Allen for taking that chance and doing this. And now the program out in Turney, they have a full-time administrator who works out there for just this program, and I believe there are like 120, 130 students in the program. Mm. So they have, I think, 4, maybe 5 cohorts that are going through. So
now that you're in Turney, which is medium security,
right?
But not max, right? Just medium.
Not
max. Yeah. Right. So that's the next level up of offenders. Oh, and that probably includes violence and all that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's talk about the first day of work there. Going into a minimum situation versus a medium situation.
Well, fortunately, I already had my sea legs, so to speak, because I'd gone through a course before. So I understood what was going to happen with the guards. I understood the attitudes that I might encounter and some of that.
Did any of the guards give you a hard time? Like you were some sort of a scab, breaking the ranks? You know what I mean?
I wouldn't say they gave me a hard time. The attitude at Turney, and let me just preface this because I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of the institution. That's a huge risk for them. And
which is?
To bring someone in, you're bringing in a civilian.
Yeah, of course.
And it's an extra responsibility for them. And for the people who've worked there for a long time, they are just as institutionalized as the inmates. So their mindset, and they, let's just be honest, they deal with stuff on a daily basis. They go to work. I don't guess they have many relaxing moments in that job.
Yeah.
And they see a side of it that I'm not seeing. I'm coming in for 3 hours, and I have a very attentive group of students, and it'd be very easy to think, oh, look, they're all wonderful human beings.
I'm sure they see humanity at its worst as
exactly.
Well. Sure.
So I just want to say all that because I don't want to sound like I'm biased one way or the other. I try to be objective. But I came in, and that class was unique, and I don't want to give any information away that might reveal someone's identity, but it was very clear from the tattoos and the markings that you're dealing with a whole different level of stuff going on there than what you're seeing in a minimum security.
Mm-hmm. This is more gang members and perhaps some murderer elements and things like that. Yeah,
absolutely. And
it's got to be a little surreal from your perspective.
Well, the mistake I made was using the internet to Google.
Some of your students?
Yeah.
Oh.
Because their writing was wonderful and the politeness, and I'm kind of thinking like, what did they do to get here? And because some students make an impression on you like these are intelligent people, but it's not Adam Shelby at a minimum security. You could see Adam. He's a bright guy, but I could also see him making a mistake.
Sure.
He's human. But these guys, they've been in there for 20 years. What did they do?
Right.
And then you Google it, and there's so much information available, and you can read appeals, and you're like, oh, God, I can't make eye contact with this person again. Yes. So surreal is a good word for it. But that first class I had out there was, again, like a life changer. Because in some ways it was more emotionally impactful because there were some of the people in the minimum security where I would feel like, they're by the grace of God go high, one wrong turn, one different decision in a situation, and
one set of different parents. One number missing off a bank account. There's so many different variables that it just completely change the course a person walks down.
And even to think the things that I did, when I was younger, that I think it's so easy when we're young we do something that's a little bit of breaking the law, and we don't, and we feel entitled to that. But that's particularly when we're young, we don't fully appreciate why laws exist. And when we're older, we might argue against them because we find them to be immoral. But when we're younger, we rebel against laws because, and I'm saying this like we, but I think this is to be generally true, we rebel against laws because we find them to impinge upon our happiness. I
really want
fast.
That Tootsie Roll. I want to drive fast.
And that exactly.
Like the 6-year-old stealing the piece of candy.
Exactly.
I saw a comedian the other day talking about drunk driving, and he said basically, there's the people that get arrested for drunk driving, and then there's all the other people who have definitely should not have been driving that have never been caught, and.
Yeah. I read a statistic, and I have no idea how they would come up with this, but that said that the average male drives under the influence 84 times before they get arrested.
Dang.
And I don't know how they would calculate that. I'm sure they did surveys and so forth. But so to go back to the vehicular manslaughter, killed a couple people drunk driving, and you think, man, when I was younger, I could have been me. Mm-hmm. I think the statute of limitations is up. I can confess that I'm old enough now. But but you see how if this decision had turned out differently, and then led to this decision, and then. So thinking back to someone I knew in college, I won't mention his name. He's in Florida now, and he's a lawyer. But he got arrested for distribution of drugs. He came back from spring break with some marijuana and cocaine, and he had talked about it so openly that they were just waiting for him. And kicked him out of school, but there's a guy whose father's a doctor. And so that doesn't change his life.
The guy that was caught for the drugs, his parents were wealthy. And
so
I'm guessing white, probably? Yep. Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
So he goes back to Florida and gets his life together and becomes an attorney. But for someone else, that leads to a jail term, which leads to another crime, which leads to... And there's that thing, they're by the grace of God or whatever you...
And it is also about choices. It's not like the universe thrusts... Everybody has...
Sure.
Choice. It's not to say that somebody born into poverty, and I mean, this is the argument. The people who are born into poverty are so much more likely to commit a crime. They, like you said, they don't have maybe the role models. They're not getting the education. They're throwaway, quote unquote, people. Unfortunately. But there's also people that are in that situation that rise up from that, and but not all of us are able to do that. Right. And there's a heck of a lot of judgment on, I'm a self-starter, so so they should just pick themselves up by their bootstraps. It's not that freaking simple.
So we said earlier, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle.
The truth is somewhere in the middle.
And I firmly believe in free will, and I firmly believe in, we have a responsibility to be the best people that we can be. And I don't take kindly to people who make excuses. And I guess to go back to the prison thing, one thing I saw quickly, and this goes all the way back to Charles Bass, was the mentality of I'm a victim versus I did something wrong and I'm going to improve my life. And you can see it in their whole demeanor, their outlook, the way they write, the way they respond in class. There were people who were definitely taking advantage of the situation. They're sitting in the back, they're passing stuff back and forth, and I'm like, this is...
Do they get kicked out? What happens to them?
All I did in that situation, because this is a complicated answer that's really not that interesting. All I said was, I would like to have a guard come in the room and just randomly, I don't want them to know he's coming at a certain time, and just pop your head in and you can hang as long as you want. And that just solved that problem, because I did not want to get into a...
Yeah.
Now at Turney, my understanding is, my last semester they taught there was a student council that was taking responsibility for classroom issues. And
that's kind of neat that they would have... Yeah.
Well...
A jury of your peers. As you...
and to give them some autonomy in that situation, and not have it be in my hands. Because, I had one inmate that was behaving what I consider to be inappropriately, and make sure I said that right. And I brought it up And this guy confronted me about it, and it was probably the scariest moment I've ever had in this situation, because there's a long walk from the classroom until you get back inside the compound and you're through the gates and so forth. So I was walking back alone. It was dark. It was because it's a night class. And this guy came up and he started going off. And I was out there in the middle of the prison yard with an inmate, and there were no correctional officers around. And I was kind of like, it was the scariest moment I've had there for sure. And I wasn't necessarily scared of the person in front of me, but I was scared of the fact that I was completely exposed in the yard. And but long story short, another inmate the next week came up and said something to the effect of, "We can take care of this," in a way that...
So they knew that that guy was harassing you?
Yeah, that word got out. It, again, without going into all the details...
Well, now I'm interested.
Well, there are. I really don't know any details in them.
But
somehow the word got around. Word got around campus, so to speak.
So that guy probably talked some smack about you, and then he said something to the effect of he was going to give you some business.
Well, who knows? But the other guy said they could take care of it, and I was like, well, we just have to let this be what it's going to be, because I didn't want to think about how they were going to take care of it. Yeah. So long story short, they have a student council, and this goes back to that original idea we started talking about, which is teaching what I feel to be the responsibility of teaching. This is why I presented on what I presented at Belmont, because I feel like if we as educators go out there and we treat them differently and accept behavior that we wouldn't accept in a classroom. I mean, everybody's different, but I don't allow my students to just have random conversations by themselves in class and use their cell phones. I mean, you're either paying attention or you're not going to be in my classroom. Within reason, I mean, I'm dealing with adults. I'm teaching at college, but generally speaking, you're not allowed to impinge on someone else's right to have an education. So what I presented on at Belmont was this idea that we have to go in there and maintain... We're not just teaching the subject matter, we're also teaching a certain population of people how to be successful in an environment that many of them have grown up in. And there's a different set of rules. I mean, if you've been incarcerated since you're 15 years old, you've been in and out of juvie, then you go to prison, you're going to have a difficult time adjusting socially. So it really wasn't that interesting.
No, it's incredibly interesting.
But
I'll be the judge of that.
Okay.
You wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was interesting, mister.
But yeah, I mean, I did some research on systems theory and cybernetics in terms of communication, and presented, and like I said, a few people were offended by it. And let me go back to that.
People
at the conference.
At the conference were offended by you saying treat them like you would treat anyone.
Treat them, yes, maintain standard. That's why the guy said, like,
okay.
Yeah, the whole, aren't you coming from a, what do you call
privileged.
it? Yeah, space of privilege, yeah. But I will say that there's a lot going on with education in prison that is not about college credits. And, I mean, some of the presentations I went to, and maybe this is just my old school traditionalism coming out, but I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. You're doing this in a college classroom? I mean...
What is this?
Well, so for example, one I went to, it was I'm not going to give any details, but first we got up and stood in a circle and held hands and did some like chanting and singing.
This is the person talking about it.
Or this is what he does in his...
This is what he does.
Right, so he was replicating the experience.
Now that's a hippie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a hippie.
So they were holding hands and chanting?
And...
Were they at least chanting their ABCs?
Yeah. No, I mean, I was like, I'll get in, like, relaxed. And I mean, it was just...
I get meditation, absolutely. And that makes sense.
It's a college class.
Yeah, I was going to say, but that has its own place. Meditation can be a meditation class. Education should be an education class.
We have approximately 42 contact hours with our students. I don't think we have time. I don't know what you're teaching, but I can't get it all done in 42 hours without taking 10 minutes out of each class to meditate and hold hands. So,
yeah.
But that's the thing. I'm like, and that's my experience, obviously. This person's teaching at not an Ivy League institution, but a higher level institution, and maybe a different student population.
Had they taught Oh, wait a minute. So that person wasn't even teaching in prisons?
No, this was what he was doing in prison. But my point is...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Maybe his student population is different. But,
yeah, sure.
But I was just... The overall impression I took away from every session I presented on Sunday morning. So I'd been there for Friday and Saturday and attended a bunch of sessions. And I was like, this isn't real. I mean, I don't know what all your experience... But everything I heard was just like, essentially, we're dumbing this down. These poor, underprivileged people. And like, that's not my experience at all. These are intelligent, capable.
David was highly intelligent. He's like a philosopher.
And if you go in I would feel disrespected if someone taught me that way. And I feel like these men would also feel the same way. Like,
sure. They don't need to be pandered to.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So I went home Saturday night and rewrite my whole presentation. I was up to like 3 a.m. and then I was back to present it the next
Harlan
day.
on fire! I like it. Man on fire.
It actually worked out well because I was in no mood to be so when they started with the whole space of privilege, I wasn't even trying to be like, well, I see your point. I was just like, well, of course I'm coming from a space of privilege. I was just, I'm going to shut this down.
Yeah.
But.
Good for you.
Long story short. Or longer, perhaps. It has been eye-opening. It's given me, on a selfish, personal level, an appreciation for freedom. Like, I'm going to go, when I leave here, I'm going to go get in my car and go 70 miles an hour down the internet.
Down the internet. Also a freedom that they don't get in jail.
I'll have my sunroof open, and I'm going to go home in my own home and play my guitars and all the stuff that you just take for granted. And it's so easy in our culture to buy into, like, well, I should have more, or these people have more, and realize, wow, like, we all forget, but like just on a daily basis, that whole thing of gratitude. And like, I have been blessed with so much in my life that I did not ask for, that
circumstance.
Partly genetics, partly the way my parents raised me. They taught me a work ethic, and they worked really hard to teach good values. But I never went without. I never saw my parents abusing drugs. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Or each other.
It's such a different world. And
I have a question. Yeah. So, statistically speaking, the students that go through your classes and classes like this, what is their reoffending statistic once they're out?
I don't know. I don't have that information.
We know because David and Adam are clearly active members of society in a healthy way and are contributing and all that. So there's 2.
I haven't not heard of anyone going back, and I have some Facebook connections, and I think that would show up if it...
Yeah, sure.
At the Belmont conference, there were 4 former inmates who had completed the program. Mm-hmm. And every so often I'll hear this person graduated, this person finished, or whatever. I know one person got out of Turney. This was just an amazing story. I hope he's still doing okay. He came by my office. He was wearing clothes that were clearly too large for him. And he was talking about what his life is like on the outside. And it's harder.
Yeah.
He's working 2 jobs. He has to go to Narcotics Anonymous a certain number of times a week. Some guy at his church just gave him a bag of hand-me-down clothes, which he was wearing. And he said, all I know how to do is have someone drop by with a bag of drugs, and then I get on the phone and sell them. And, bless his heart. He's doing it day by day, and he's coming out talk about the pressure of our society, and we have this age thing. So here you are, you're coming out of incarceration, and you're of a certain age, and
you have a felony,
and you're at an entry level job.
They ask that on your job thing. So how are you supposed to? Driver's license?
Yeah,
nope, sorry.
Absolutely. Everything's
taken away from you, and then you're expected to reintegrate into society. Talk about a giant issue of assimilation.
I want to give. I don't know where we're doing on time. We've been rambling for a while, but
no, ramble on, brother.
To give a shout out to a former professor of mine, Dr. Robert Waxler. who I understand has been sick. He lives up in Rhode Island, and we kind of lost touch, obviously. But the point being, Dr. Waxler started a program up there, changing lives through literature. And he had a friend who was a judge, and they put this program together where first-time offenders who were facing a jail term for certain offenses, not all offenses, were given the choice of taking a literature course or doing their time. And it's been very successful.
Does anybody ever decide to take the time?
Yeah, some people do.
Interesting.
Some people do. And there's a pre-selection going on. The people who are more inclined to take the class are probably less likely to reoffend in the first place. But nonetheless, it's keeping people out of jail.
Yeah.
It's obviously saving the taxpayers a bunch of money.
Sure.
Which speaks to your point earlier, of why would you deny someone an education? From a financial perspective, the cost of keeping someone incarcerated, even if only 1 out of 10, it's still cheaper to educate those 10 and have one success than to leave that one incarcerated for 20 years.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
it just makes good money sense. If there's no other convincing argument, the balance sheet ought to be a convincing argument.
Mm-hmm.
But it.
So the program is still going strong.
Yes. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I have one last. A colleague of mine. He's a philosophy teacher, and he was offered to teach a class out there, and they were having difficulty building a schedule for him because of supply and demand. So it was kind of in a situation where, well, you can either take this course or you can go drive somewhere else and teach this course. So we came and talked to him. He's I don't know how to describe him. I mean, he's a philosophy teacher, so he definitely has that bent. But he was not very on board with the idea of going out there and teaching. So I talked to him and I explained, this is the best class you're ever going to teach, the best class you're ever going to teach. And he was clearly skeptical.
Funny for a philosophy guy.
I was going to say, as a philosopher, he's probably more of a skeptic than
It's funny.
But he came back after 3 weeks and stopped by my office and said, this is the best class.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But it's true. They worked so hard. They do their reading. They talk about it amongst themselves. In terms of an educational environment, it's like Bohemia. I mean, think about it. They don't have a lot of distractions. It's not like they're going out on dates or, you know what I mean? So those people who are huddled together, and they try to house them in the same pod. So they're like having a little salon in there talking about their philosophy readings.
It's great though. It's expanding their minds and
totally
taking them out of what seems like an inevitability and providing them with a possibility. What a magical gift, It's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I think it's incredible, and I'm so thankful. And to know that these inmates are, because they're learning and they're excited and they're now seeing future for the first time, maybe ever, and that's exponentially moving throughout the prison and exciting other.
This is what we hope.
Inmates.
This is what we hope.
Like a virus, but the best kind.
Because to get in the program, you have to follow the rules. You don't follow the rules, you're booted out of the program. So.
And it gives them something to get in the program in the first place. These are as Adam and David both spoke about, they tutored people that really wanted to. And Adam said in some cases, these are people that could not read, couldn't spell their own name, and that they helped them.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
One last...
No, keep it. There are no last. Just keep talking, brother. It's all good.
But, so the first class I taught, my Comp 1 class, I wasn't sure how I was going to fill the time. So I bought a reader. Or I didn't buy the reader. Julie bought a set of readers for them.
I don't know what that means.
I'm sorry. I asked for a collection of short stories. as a reader as opposed to a rhetoric. So I had a rhetoric which teaches composition skills with some readings, and then I had them get a separate thing that was just a reader.
Meaning an anthology.
Yeah, precisely.
Okay, got it.
Sorry.
No, it's
I
okay.
got into composition terms there.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
So I the collection I have was 40 short stories, and I had them read Cathedral.
Great one.
Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Joyce Carol Oates. But I also had them read Barn Burner, which is a William Faulkner story. And it's about a young boy whose father is an arsonist. And whenever he has an altercation with someone, he responds with arson. And this young boy makes this decision to go tell. And it leads to what we perceive as the death of his father. He doesn't see it. He just hears the gunshots. He's just running. And
spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry, but I figure the story's been around for a long time. But I was on the fence about it. And when I spoke to the warden before I taught the class, he's like, "Yeah, well, make sure you don't do anything that's too, violent." And I mean, I'd already done "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" which is kind of spooky violent. But that Barn Burner was probably the most emotional class, because it's about a young boy who is clearly being pressured to follow into the footsteps of his father into a life of living outside the law and crime. And
which many of these folks...
Exactly. And the victim mentality. It's the whole sins of the father thing.
Absolutely.
And
Adam, his father, his grandfather, his uncle, all incarcerated.
David.
Yeah, David's father, sure.
And that was an intense day. There was a little dust in the room in people's eyes that day.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, I made a non-verbal communication to indicate a tear.
They were crying,
yeah.
in other words. I'm sure it touched very deeply.
Yeah, and I mean, Faulkner's just a great writer. So
yes.
And I'm rambling and nerding on this, but I've always been a short story Faulkner. I think I wish he'd written more, because he can pack so much power into such a short story.
Oh,
kind of a John Updike.
All of them.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah, I know you're a huge fan of books, and
I am.
And that thing of feeling like you're not alone in the world, which is what drew me to books when I was younger, of seeing like, oh, I'm not the only one who's thought this way, or as the teacher tells Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye, like, to read books and see, try different sizes of. I've got it. I'm not saying it correctly, but like, we need to read books to sort of see where our brain fits in the world and stretch it some and see some ideas, or
Yeah, books are the best friends, and
yeah,
they really are.
Yeah.
And some books are such great friends that you go back and visit them time and again.
Mm-hmm.
You say, "I am not yours. You are not mine, but hold my hand, and we will, walk
beautiful.
through this world together."
That's a beautiful way to say it.
I love books so much.
Yeah.
I love reading. I love being a part of the writer's mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I love poetry so much as well. Anyway, enough about me. Who cares?
No.
Anyway, go on.
Well, no, I mean, that's a beautiful sentiment, and there are some writers like that. Martin Luther King Jr. I teach Letter from Birmingham Jail every semester, and that's one that I read every time. There are some things I teach that I've read so many times I don't need to reread them to go in and teach them. But just his ability to speak so eloquently and come up with these beautiful metaphors, and it's just amazing. It's kind of like reading John Updike. I'm not a huge fan of John Updike in the whole, but like every page I'm like, wow, how did you think of that? Or what a cool way to express that. I mean, as someone who writes, it's just so inspiring that someone can continually come up with a fresh way to express an idea. But Martin Luther King, like, we are tied together in one inescapable garment of destiny.
Martin Luther King, he Jr. dropped some mad truths. Absolutely. And some were polarizing for sure. But man, what a voice. Yeah. And when I mean voice, I mean the literary, in the literary sense.
Absolutely.
Wow. Tell me about your best day there in the prison. If you
boy.
can recall one, or one of them.
Oh, well, I think my best day every semester is the day that I give back grades. It's never my favorite day because on my regular campus, day-to-day classes, there's always a population that, without getting into too much detail, I think they still sort of have a high school mentality, and they think there's sort of a Hail Mary situation at the end, like, I don't really have to do all this work, or he didn't really mean it when I said. But giving back those papers, I mean, in prison, they took it seriously, and suddenly the bar is set almost differently, and I have to remember, like, I have to grade them according to the same standard. I can't curve this down because so many worked so hard. So that was a great day out there. At Turney, it was this was this good indication of the difference. They got their first grades and they complained about them. They thought that I had graded too harshly. And I think that's part of the institutionalization of it. You've been in prison so long, you've learned certain ways so I'm like, no, I'm not changing anybody's grade. This is where we're at. If you want a better grade, you're going to have to
rise to the occasion. And
then they took it seriously, and I mean, there was some amazing writing came out of that class. In a communications class, they got their test grades, and they did very, very well, overwhelmingly. And I told them, I said, this is the exact same test I give my students on the main campus. And they were, did we do better? I'm like, well, and I gave them the math of it, and they were just so incredibly proud that they had done, like,
that's beautiful.
Their average was 5 points higher than the average of a standard,
on the outside.
Not standard class there.
Yeah.
But so those moments of seeing the satisfaction in their faces when they realized, well, I worked and it paid off. And I think that's, again, something that a lot of people...
It's a huge lesson.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful and important lesson in life. You work hard.
And it pays off.
Yeah. It may not pay off exactly the way you think it's going to. That's another one of life's little lessons.
Right.
You, as my father used to always say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Yeah. So you never know really the direction it's going to go. But if you show up...
one thing I always emphasize to my students, and I used to, even when I was a guitar teacher, I'd say the same thing. Learning is a very honest endeavor. It's probably the most honest endeavor. If you want to see a cause and effect relationship, work hard, and you will see the results.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee you're going to be a rock star, but I can guarantee if you sit down and you really practice, not just fart around with the TV on with your guitar. If you really practice it, your writing, your guitar playing, your songwriting, it pays off.
Yeah.
And it doesn't guarantee, it is its own reward. It doesn't guarantee money or fame or success. But if that's your goal, and I know a lot of people who make a lot of money who aren't the brightest people. I don't know that making a lot of money necessarily requires, I think it requires a difference.
Tenacity. It requires tenacity, I think.
It absolutely, anything does.
And sometimes, being born into it as well. How's the coffee?
It's delicious. Thank you so much.
Do you want a little more?
I think I'm good. I think I'm feeling, I haven't had a whole lot of caffeine. See, I'm already a little...
Yeah, it's good. I'm hopping you up.
Crazy coffee pusher.
I could talk about this forever. I just think it's such a fascinating subject. I think it's wonderful that you are a part of this. And I mean, the fact I secretly want everyone on the planet to read books. So,
right.
Not secretly, I say it all the time. It's not a secret. So it's exciting to know that you've opened up the world to these people to fall in love with words, and they express themselves as well, right? They've written papers, and I bet you some of those papers have been pretty eye-opening. Anything stand out there? Personal essays, right?
The in Comp 1, the first couple essays they write, I have them write from first person, just to get familiar with the modes of writing and, focus on things like paragraphing, because I don't know where students are going to be. So rather than try to bring in research at the beginning, I make sure that we just focus. So I really don't want to reveal anything, tell stories but yes.
Out of school.
us literally in this case. Some of those essays, cause and effect, opened a floodgate for people.
Explain what cause and effect.
With cause and effect, the students are given an option of talking about the causes to an event in their life or the effects of an event in their life. And they can make a causal chain if they want, but obviously...
I bet that was heavy.
I mean, here are some people who have had some time to think about causes and effects.
Sure.
And cause and effect is a dominating way of thinking in the Western world. So, I mean, it's a skill that the better you are at it, the more likely you are to be successful.
That would be an incredible book to read. Have you ever talked to any of them about putting together an anthology of within the system?
That's an interesting idea.
I would read that. In fact, there was a book that I read that was an anthology of people on death row. Forgetting the name of the book right now. It was, I have it. It's on my shelf.
You mentioned this before.
It's incredible to read it, and again, it's first person from those sitting on death row about what they'd done. Cause and effect. Yeah.
So that particular assignment was one where a lot of people were asking, like, can we write more then? Because it was to be a 3.5 to 4 page essay. And they're like, do we lose points if we go over? And I was like, well, as long as you're writing a solid, tight, well-edited essay, no. I mean, if you're rambling, yeah. And
it's got to be cathartic.
It was like getting 10, 12-page essays and just stories of... I mean, this is how I know how some of them ended up in prison.
Yeah, that gives me the shivers.
Yeah, it was eye-opening. In that way, the minimum security prisoners were much more open about what got them there. The Turney students were not so much willing to talk about it, and it's probably because most of them had done something worse. It's no matter.
Then what was done to them? You mean? Or worse than the other students?
A crime that was.
Sure.
That. And there's a respect thing that happens there, and our impression management as from a communications perspective, and you probably don't want to talk about what you did to your teacher in that situation when it's because some of these guys did some bad things.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it. But anyway, that was such a great question. I just want to point that out. Like, what's your best day? And it made me think about a couple other moments that were. I think one of the best things. Do you remember we were sitting and talking with David Nunn, and he said, "Mr. Pease," and I said, "Oh, you can call me Harlan," and he said, "No, you're Mr. Pease. That's respect." And
I love him. He's so great.
I mean, but that's so much validation for all the decisions I made. Like, no, this is how I'm going to run the classroom. No, this is the way I'm going to grade. Because I really do firmly believe that people will rise or sink to the expectations you establish for them. And one of the best things I ever read, it came from a personal trainer or heard. He said, most people set their ceiling where they ought to set their floor. And it's so true. And this is a guy who trains people for
That's fantastic.
He trains people to do the Ironman competition and triathlons, and he said, just so many people they set their ceiling where they ought to set their floor. And I mean, I'm guilty of it, and there are days when I don't work myself as hard as I should, but it's always good to kind of keep that in the back of your mind that we're capable of so much more than we think we are on a daily basis.
I love that so much. I'm so glad you're on the planet.
Well, it's
wonderful.
You. And likewise, thank you.
It makes me very happy. Well, let's shift a little bit.
And
let's talk about Musicians on Call.
Okay.
So describe what that is.
Okay, Musicians on Call is an organization that they have arrangements with hospitals to allow volunteers to come in and play music for patients in their rooms, their hospital rooms.
Terminal or anyone?
There are different programs. When I started, and I've been with them close to since the beginning. That's a southern way to say that, close to since the beginning.
You will be assimilated.
I might could. But
got some sweet tea.
Yeah.
What do you want?
I don't know. Someone said to me once, "Oh, sweet tea." Yeah. She said, "I like it so sweet, it makes my teeth itch." And I was like, "I think I'm just going to pass on that."
That's a great way to. That's a beautiful turn of phrase. I love that. I actually don't enjoy sweet tea.
I don't either.
Gross.
I don't know it. But anyway, so when I started, we were playing a couple programs at Vanderbilt and Bordeaux, which is a long-term care. So I played a lot at Bordeaux, and a lot of those patients were very heartbreaking. Not all of them had family. It was talk about eye-opening experiences. I mean, wow. And some people who just can't take care of themselves who are young. There was a diabetic patient in there who had lost both of his legs. Anyway, so because this should be a very positive thing, and I'm making it sound heavy, and sometimes it is, but in a good way. So you have a guide, and the guide will go into the room and say, I'm so such from Musicians on Call, and we have a volunteer musician here. Would you like to hear a song? And if they say yes, I'll come on in and play a song. And sometimes it turns into a conversation with the patient, especially if they're lonely. We kind of have to watch our time because we need to make sure we get to every room.
That is something to think about, that some of these people in hospital, they don't have any family at all.
They don't.
And they're all ages, right? They're not just old
people. Yeah. Well, at Bordeaux in particular, at Vanderbilt, we might do like a step up or step down from heart surgery. So some people who are waiting for a transplant or waiting for surgery. Other times, I'm on a floor where it's people who are recovering. They're always more relaxed, and and then we added programs at Stallworth Rehabilitation. I say they did all this work. I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. I'm calling them young girls because I'm dating myself, but Dana Brim and Katie Epley, they're both married now, but they were the whole thing when I started. It was the two of them.
Musicians on Call. They started it.
They didn't start it.
Oh, okay.
But they started it here in Nashville.
Ah, got it.
And now, it's grown so much, and they've both have jobs with a lot more responsibility, and there's a staff to take care of so much.
And you got a big award from them last year.
I did.
Or was it
2 years ago?
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Time flies. And what was that award, sir?
That was the Volunteer Musician of the Year award.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Doesn't surprise me one bit.
At that time, I had done, I think, 100 bedside programs. That's what they call it. That's
in a year?
No, that's over the course of, I do it like once, twice a month, but I had a total of 100. So it's not 100 playing for 100 patients. It's volunteering 100 for 100 shifts, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
And I'd also
done
on
one
something.
Shift, you might have a bunch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like on an average night, depending. See, sometimes I play at a live hospice, and the hospice, you might play for 8 people because people are less likely to want music. Patients are in different states, and the families, and people are actively dying. So that's a different thing. And then I'll play like Sarah Cannon, which is a cancer center. You might play for a lot more people there because they want, So it varies, but anyway, I'm rambling a little bit on that.
No, ramble on.
So the award night, I had also done a thing called Project Playback, and we went to Bordeaux. It was myself and a girl named Christina Morris. She got married. I think her married name is Irwin now. She moved, but she was a volunteer for Musicians on Call. She was an intern, I believe, at that time, and so we went in and we just got a bunch of patients that were interested, and we had them tell stories, and we wrote songs.
Oh, neat.
So we wrote a couple songs with them, and just collected, made sure everybody had a voice or a line and so forth in the song. And I went home and made up some backing tracks on trusty old GarageBand. And I brought my remote recording set up, and we got all the patients to sing. And I played guitar, and Dana's husband, Adam, played a cajon. Mm-hmm. And I took that home and just kind of doctored it up and added a little bit of sugar on it, and did a couple songs, and we pressed a CD. So I had done that project, which was also a reason I was given that award. And that was a pretty. We did a CD release with them, and some of these patients are perfectly healthy, but they're disabled in some way, and other people have some mental things going on. So it was quite a collection of people, and we had them up there, and I'm playing the guitar and leading them through singing it, and a bunch of other patients came out. They had it in a common room, and there was an audience, and it was just one of those moments where you're like, I don't know what I did in my life to end up here, but I must have done something right. You know what I mean? Like, it was, and I was getting so much more out of it than they were, but not all of them. There was one guy there, and I can't remember his name. Actually, I do remember his name. I'm just not going to share it. But he's confined to a wheelchair, and he has something going on with his speech. He can't speak clearly. He had some sort of head injury when he was younger, and he loved Vince Gill. He played the keyboard, and it was pretty erratic, but I managed to get some of that recorded and where it really synced well, mix it up in the mix so you could hear his playing. I mean, the day of the CD release, he had dressed up. He had cowboy boots on and a bolo tie, and I mean, it was just magical.
Yeah.
I kind of forgotten about that. I'm glad you asked that question, because it was one of those experiences where I worked so many hours doing it that at the end I was so burnt I couldn't really. I was just like, finally it's over, because I have a day job, trying to do my own life, and
sure.
This was all consuming for about 3 weeks.
Yeah,
but
you certainly live a life of service. You really do, and it's
that's sweet of you to say.
It's beautiful. It really is. You're magical.
Well, a long time ago, I when I was 19, I started out as an electrical engineering major, and I was always pretty good with math and science, or better than good, really. Mm-hmm. So I went into that. I'd received an academic scholarship because of my SAT scores, and 4 years tuition paid.
Nice.
Yeah. I really wasn't ready, and I didn't know what I wanted out of life at that point. And despite the fact that I was a voracious reader, particularly like 5th through 8th grade, I mean, the amount I read is just, it's still like mind-boggling. That we moved to a town in 5th grade, when I was in 5th grade, and I had access to a library for the first time. Where I lived before, it was pretty remote. And not that there wasn't a library close by, but it just was, my parents were busy, it just wasn't. And my parents provided us with books and a set of encyclopedias, but I didn't have, so suddenly I could walk to a library. And you remember the old library cards where they'd stamp the date, like within like 6 months I'd filled like back and forth both
passport
sides.
To the mind. Yeah.
That's a great, so, anyway, my point being, I got rambling there a little bit, is when I was about 19, I was having a crisis. I didn't know what I wanted out of life. I'd signed up for engineering when I got the scholarship because I didn't know what else. I didn't really want anything. I was just kind of happy at that point in my life in a weird way. I was working at a marina. I was kind of coming into my own. I was a bit of a late bloomer. But I had the scholarship. Obviously, you're not going to turn down a scholarship. And I had to declare a major, and one of the stipulations was I couldn't change the major. So I signed up for electrical engineering, figuring the math, science, and my dad works with electronics. So in tribute to him, he's a huge influence on my life. I signed up for engineering, and it was a bad fit. And I had an A average through my first year, but my heart wasn't in it. And I was working in a lab with, part of my scholarship was I had a work job, a work-study type job, and I was working in a lab with a bunch of master's and PhD students, and we were working on we had something for the government, and I just knew I didn't have the passion. And we'd get together after work and hang out, and these guys would get drinking and talk about their research, and I was kind of like, you guys ever been on a date? Where are the women at? You know what I mean? So
that's amazing.
So I was kind of felt like, and there were some smart people in that group. I mean, one guy, I won't mention his name because speaking of people who have committed some crimes, he ended up he's just too smart for his own good. But this guy was probably the most brilliant person I've ever encountered in my life. I mean, like IQ up in the 170 range. And he'd sit there and talk to me, and I'd be like, Jeff, you lost me after like 30 seconds. Can we back this up? And he just so wanted to share all that stuff that was going on in that big old brain of his. And I mean, I was like...
What kind of crime did he commit without...
Drugs.
Oh, drugs. Okay.
Manufacturing. He did a little Walter White action.
Walter White.
He was Walter White before Walter White's time.
Yes. He was OG Walter White.
He's OG Walter White. If I ever see him, I'm going to tell him that. It's been years. I mean, I know where he's still...
Is he incarcerated?
No.
No, he's still on there. Okay.
I'll just give this one little detail. The judge basically said, you are too smart to be in prison. And he gave him an option of moving somewhere and being confined to that area for 10 years. And obviously this person took that deal.
Yeah.
And it was an educational center, and he's gone on and published some papers and done some...
Fascinating.
The work we were doing did not take off like they thought it was going to, which is...
The engineering work?
Yeah.
For the government?
Which is unfortunate, because if it had taken off, I mean, this person would be like a Bill Gates character. And I mean, one of those guys. I mean, he's just
Again, it's
brilliant.
doorways, right?
Yeah.
It's the doorways.
Well, not that he's lived a bad life. I mean, he's been in research and education his whole life. It's not like he's had to go bust rocks or something.
Right.
What a character.
Now, here's a question.
Yeah.
So, do you think that had he... I'm assuming he's white. I'm just going to keep assuming this. If he had not been white and was busted for drugs and was hyper intelligent, do you think that they would have given him that same option? There's no way to tell, of course. But
I mean,
it always makes me wonder. I mean,
he committed his crime in Texas.
Oh, really?
So,
Yikes.
Based on my perception of Texas, and I haven't been in a while, to be perfectly honest, but I'm thinking he'll probably know would be the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going back 20 plus years.
Sure.
The world has changed.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a brilliant person, though.
It's fascinating.
And
I don't mean to always bring race into it, but I think it is an important topic, especially now more than ever. But
and this person had a ton of people go to bat for him who, I mean,
yeah,
a ton of professors reached out and wrote letters
saying this guy is super smart and bored out of his mind, and
it's
hey man, I've had a misspent youth, too smart for my own good, and got into lots of fun little troubles.
Yep.
Most of which were never. Anyway, off of me. Back to you. Back to you.
So to finish that story up, so about the age of 19, I realized I didn't have a passion for electrical engineering. I loved math, and I was reasonably drawn to science. And I thought about studying a pure science or becoming a mathematician. But at that time, I remember one afternoon I was just I was down, I was depressed for sure. I couldn't have identified it as that at that age, but I just realized that it was important to me to do something with my life that I felt was going to be positive. I was such an overthinker. We had this job and we're doing something essentially for the military, and I had a little hang up about it even at that age. It was designed to save lives, but you save lives in machines that are designed
to kill.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, have you ever seen the movie Real Genius?
No.
That's fantastic with Val Kilmer. If y'all have not seen this movie, it is fantastic. But you just made me think of that because that's.
I'll add it.
I'm not going to spoiler alert this movie. It is very funny and very well done, and what you just said reminded me of it. But
I'm going to add it to my queue.
Yeah.
So anyway, that point came, and I just realized that through my ability to think it through at that age, with the education I had and so forth, I saw that going into education and going into music were two things that I didn't think you could ever trace back to being harmful to people. Even death metal or gangster rap or whatever, I still I don't think those things are harmful. As I've gotten older, I've moderated that viewpoint to some extent. With education too, I can see how some cases education can be harmful, but anything that becomes systematized in any way is subject to abuses.
Becomes a slippery slope.
Yeah,
sure. So back to the musicians on call, really quick.
Yeah.
So you're walking through, you're interacting with patients, and you're playing songs. Is it your own songs or cover songs?
I play covers unless someone specifically asks for originals, which occasionally happens. We're here in Nashville.
So I saw the application for musicians on call because I was interested in doing it, and one of the questions it said on the application, it said, "Do you feel like you might cry during one of these sessions with the patients?" I thought, oh, hell yeah. So I'm like, well, I'm out of the race there. I mean, how do you keep it together?
You don't always.
Yeah. Especially with children. I mean, I imagine you see children as well.
Not so much because I don't do the children's hospital.
But it's part of it, isn't
it? You can, as a volunteer musician or guide, you can choose where you want to go.
That's what I thought.
So I would think I would enjoy the children's hospital, but now that I have so much more experience with it. But in the beginning, I was like, no way. But at one time, this was in the regular hospital, and there was a girl. I mean, I'm going to say she was 13, and she was all alone in her room, and her room was sort of isolated off the main hallway too. So she wasn't even, like, if her door was open, she wasn't even seeing nurses and doctors go by. So I went in there and I said, what would you like to hear? And she's like, oh, anything. And I said, would you like to hear something up-tempo or slow? And she said up-tempo. And she had these beautiful brown eyes. So I sang Brown-Eyed Girl. And I got like halfway through a verse, and she just burst into tears. And obviously it wasn't the song. It was just the situation and her own fear. And that was just one of those moments where you're I don't know how tear up in that situation, because I don't know how to. She was just mentioned. I mean, I'm scared, and I'm an adult, and I still don't want to go into the hospital and have a routine procedure. So whatever. So there are moments where you're going to have very emotional times.
How did you comfort her? What did you do?
At that point, I was relatively new to the program. I mean, that might have been one of my first solo times, because the first times you go through, you have the guide, yourself, and then there's a representative who's there to sort of facilitate and train. So this might have been one of the first times I went by myself. And I don't think I did a very good job of comforting her at all. We're strict, you can't touch the patients. So you're not supposed to bring up, we're really supposed to keep a pretty solid boundary, because that could get weird.
Absolutely.
So I think I just said, I'm so sorry, or something like that, and just kind of followed the guide's lead. The guides are actually trained much more than the musicians are.
Yeah.
I think the guides have a more difficult job. They go through a lot more training. They try to make it for the musicians mostly that we just go in and play a song and then go move on, so we don't have a lot of training in that aspect.
Yeah. Wow.
But
quite a life you live.
It's I've actually thought about training as a guide, because there is a backlog of musicians. There are plenty of volunteer musicians. There aren't as many volunteer guides. That's my understanding. Last time I heard that, like, they had a year.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Here in Nashville, we got
a lot of musicians here. Sure.
But there are moments when you go in and it's never routine. It's never been a situation where, we go out and we do writers' nights, and I used to be a full-time gigging musician, and nights just sort of blend into, like, I know you said once, like, I have my 3 songs, I go out and do them, and they kind of become almost like press play a little bit. And
I don't like to do that.
I don't either. Yeah. But, I used to play full-time 5-6 nights a week, and it's easy to just sort of...
Yeah.
But I can't think of a single time when I've done volunteered for musicians on call where it's like, oh, here, I'm playing this song again, because it totally takes you out of your head. That's not entirely true. because it puts you in your head in a different way, but it becomes so much less about you or me as a situation.
The royal you.
Yeah, the royal you. It becomes about that patient, and there's so much more going on there than just the music. And one of the things that's a lot of times patients, and I don't know if this is a generational thing because they're older, but they look like serious when you're playing, almost in a way that like we have become like if we were playing a writer's night and someone had that look, you'd think they're hating this song. And then when you're done with the song, I mean, they'll be like, you just made my day. It's like they just go into this kind of very concentrated thing, and it could be medication. It could be they're coming from a generation where music was valued more than it is today. Sure. Not to open that can of worms.
Yeah. It's a whole other podcast.
For sure. But it's a wonderful organization.
I'll put links to everything on the...
Yeah, please do.
And do you have a website, Harlan Pease?
I don't at the moment.
Okay. Facebook.
I do have Facebook. It's pretty,
Yeah, I'll put links and stuff. Yeah. You're fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. You are too.
Harlan Pease, you are a light in the world.
Well, I try to do my little bit.
Thank you for all of your service.
Oh,
thank you for...
And you too. Thank you for doing what you do.
Oh, well, hey.
Speaking of service, hey, human. I mean, you're getting it out there, and so thank you.
Hey, thanks for being on the show.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.